Hey everyone, Steve from Backcountry Gallery here, and this time around, I want to give you 10 rapid-fire wildlife photography tips that will make an instant difference in the field. I actually have like a lot more than 10 of these though, so I'll probably do another video or two in the near future. This time, we'll focus more on camera techniques. Next time, maybe more on compositional and artistic techniques. By the way, if you want to make sure you don't miss that or any of my videos or articles, be sure to stop by my site and sign up for my free email newsletter. I only send it occasionally, so I'm not going to fill your inbox with junk or anything, but I do a lot more than videos, and the easiest way to get access to that information is through that free email newsletter. At any rate, let's get started, and note that these are not in any particular order of importance, so here we go. Tip number 1, check your settings. Now, this first tip takes practice, but it's probably the most powerful one on the list. Each time you bring your camera to your eye, glance at your settings. Ensure you have an appropriate shutter speed, f-stop, and ISO for what you see in the viewfinder, and double check to see if you have any exposure compensation set. Not only will this prevent accidents, but it'll get you to confirm that you really are using the best settings for the situation you see in the viewfinder. The biggest trick, of course, is forcing yourself to get into the habit of doing this consistently and do whatever it takes to make that happen, even if you have to stick a post-it note to the eyepiece. All right, now maybe that is taking it too far, but one thing that you actually can try to do is just kind of keep the camera with you when you're doing something else, like watching TV or working at a desk, etc. And just occasionally bring it up to your eye and look at the settings. If you do it enough, you'll develop muscle memory that will make checking your settings second nature and, most importantly, automatic. It might be a pain to get yourself in the habit, but I promise you the long-term payoffs are huge. Tip number 2, progressively step down your ISO. When you're facing a relatively stationary subject in low light, ISOs are often a problem. No matter what kind of support you're using, handheld, monopod, or tripod, you can try progressively dropping your ISO to nail the best quality shot. The way this usually works is by starting with a wide open lens and using the slowest shutter speed that you think will safely net you a sharp image. Take a quick burst, verify you do indeed have a sharp image, then drop your shutter speed to something a little less comfortable so you can use a lower ISO. Shoot again at that slower shutter speed, and again, verify you have a sharp image. Note that you may have to try this a few times to get a sharp photo as you drop shutter speeds. Once you do get a sharp photo at the slower speed, continue on to progressively slower speeds for as long as the animal will allow, or until you get to the point that the shutter speed is just too slow and you simply can't get a sharp photo. Another way to make this work is by using live view with a tripod-mounted camera. Start by setting your camera on a secure tripod, then switch to mirror up mode, full electronic shutter, silent shooting mode, or whatever mode your camera offers that is the most vibration-free. Next, set a delay using either the exposure delay option or a self-timer. Now, focus using the back LCD in live view. Once everything is absolutely perfect, trip the shutter. The delay will allow the rig to settle, and as long as your subject doesn't move, this allows you to use shutter speeds that are unthinkable with your hand on the camera. By progressively dropping ISO when I can, I'm often able to shed a couple of stops of ISO in those low light situations. Of course, people ask, why not just start with the slower shutter speed and work your way up to faster ones? I don't recommend starting off at a really slow shutter speed, since the slower you go, the higher the failure rate, and if the animal takes off before you get a sharp photo, you're done, you missed it. I recommend starting with safer shutter speeds to guarantee you get a sharp photo, since you can often fix a noisy shot, but one that's out of focus is a lost cause. In short, only play this game once you get a sharp image on the card, and only if you don't think you'll need that faster shutter speed if the action suddenly heats up. Tip number 3, use longer bursts for sharper photos. Another technique for slow shutter speeds and a relatively stationary subject is to shoot longer bursts to increase your chances of a sharp image. And yes, you could use this tip with the previous one. Now, how can shooting longer bursts give you sharper images? Think of it like this. Let's say, hypothetically, that at 1/125th of a second, you get about 1 shot in 10 sharp when hand-holding a 600mm lens. If you shoot a burst of 8 images, there's a statistical chance that not one single image is going to be sharp. However, if you shoot 20, you'll, in theory, have 2 that are indeed sharp. Basically, you're playing a numbers game. Of course, there's a lot of variables that come into play here, but shooting longer bursts when I'm stuck at slower shutter speeds has absolutely helped me nail photographs I otherwise would have missed. I've had bursts of 20, even 30 photos at really slow shutter speeds where only one or two were sharp, and sometimes those were at the end of those bursts. Had I not taken that long burst, I would have completely missed the opportunity. Tip number 4, always verify your tripod is secure. This one is really easy. Each time you set up your tripod, push down on the top before you mount your camera. I've seen too many people fail to do this, only to watch one of the tripod legs they thought was secure collapse, bringing the entire rig to the ground. Get in the habit of pushing down on the top of your tripod each time you set it up, and you'll never experience that nightmare. Tip number 5, help the camera focus. Don't you hate it when you have an AF point over your target, you engage AF and the camera hunts and hunts, eventually just giving up? What seems to happen is when your camera doesn't have an AF lock, it runs the focus ring at full speed back and forth, trying to remedy the situation ASAP. The problem is, if the AF target is poor, it can whip right past it. One trick that has worked well for me in that situation is to give the camera a hand with a little manual focus. When the camera is having a tough time getting a lock, I manually focus the lens and get focus close to correct. It doesn't have to be perfect. Then I engage AF to finish it off, and usually the camera will grab right where I want. It doesn't work every time, but it does work more often than not. Tip number 6, still can't focus? Turn the camera. If that last tip fails, not all hope is lost. Our AF sensors are sensitive to lines going a particular direction or directions depending on the AF sensor. One trick that I've used over the years is when the camera is reluctant to latch onto my target, I'll rotate the camera 45 degrees and try again. Now, it doesn't always work, but it's worth a try. If it locks on, just release your AF on button or lock focus, turn the camera back, and fire away. Tip number 7, running low on memory? Try crop mode. If you've ever found yourself at risk of filling your memory cards and you don't have any extras with you, one technique that can sometimes help is switching to crop mode. Shooting in crop mode reduces the size of the file and allows you to put more photos on your cards. Now, naturally, this should only be used if you were going to crop the photo anyway. Number 8, watch for blurry foreground objects. One habit that's really helped me in the field is always looking over my lens to see if there are any sticks, blades of grass, vines, leaves, or similar obstacles between my camera and my subject. The problem is, if you just look in the viewfinder, these objects can often blur out and look more or less invisible, especially in the heat of the moment. However, if there's some obstacle between you and your subject, it can cause a loss of sharpness and leave you wondering why the eye or the face isn't as crisp as you expect. Now, the best way to spot these problems is to look over the top of your lens and make sure there are no sticks, grass, vines, leaves, any vegetation basically, between the camera and the subject. If there are, usually just a small move left or right will remedy the situation and give you a clean shot. Number 9, anticipating a shadow pull? Keep the ISO low. Often when we're shooting, we notice shady areas that we later intend to pull up once we're back home processing the raw file. However, if you anticipate a shadow pull back home, do everything in your power to keep the ISO as low as possible in the field. When you pull the shadows, you're essentially increasing the ISO for that local area. So that means if your ISO was something like 3200 for the shot and you need a 2-stop shadow pull, those shadows are going to look like they were shot at ISO 12,800. Anytime I'm facing a heavy shadow pull, I'll do everything in my power to drop my ISO as low as I can get away with, often using a tripod or monopod to get there. It can really make a huge difference. Number 10, start tracking before it's time to shoot. If you shoot wildlife action, when you start tracking is often the difference between a keeper and a reject flag. For me, I found that I have the highest success rate when I start tracking before I actually need to shoot. Obviously, this isn't always possible. Sometimes things happen fast, but when you can do it, I find it helps. The trick is to watch not only the area that's in range of your lens, but also the areas that are a bit farther out. Nothing makes me happier than to see an animal, usually a bird, coming my way where I have ample time to secure a solid, stable AF lock before it's actually in range. The thing is, the sooner you get that stable AF lock, the sooner the AF system's wizardry can kick in to help you maintain that lock. I know there are other methods for tracking an incoming subject, but for me personally, I've had the best success just getting on the subject early and keeping on it without releasing the shutter. Of course, once it's in range, I still keep the AF engaged, but then I'm firing away. There you go, 10 quick tips that I hope you'll find useful. If you like these tips, they really are only the smallest slice of what you'll discover in my educational materials. Each of my books and video workshops are absolutely jam-packed with tips and techniques just like these that can help any photographer take their images to the next level. Make sure you check them out. The books and videos not only discuss the technical aspects, but also how, why, and when to use the techniques that they describe. Finally, thank you so much for watching. Again, remember to sign up for that free email newsletter at my site. And also, make sure you stop by the BCG Forums if you ever have a camera question. I'm there all the time. There's lots of really smart people over there that can also help you answer your camera questions. And finally, as always, make sure you like, subscribe, and get notified. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.